When the hyena smiles too wide. There's an old saying in the savannah, when a hyena grins too wide, she's not laughing, she's sizing up her next meal. A young cub might not understand the difference, but sooner or later he learns. Kwame was just a boy, 10 years old, school, soccer, storybooks. His world was simple. But there was one problem. His house was always empty. His parents worked from sunrise to sunset, breaking their backs to give him a good life. "I'm bored," he told his mother one evening. "Kwame, it's just 3 hours alone. We have to work hard to pay for your school," she answered. He understood, or at least he thought he did. What he didn't understand was why love had to feel so far away. Then his mother had an idea. "Stay with Auntie Zalika until we get home." Auntie Zalika, kind, cheerful, always smiling. The kind of person people trust without question. Poor Kwame. He didn't know that in the wild, not all smiles are the same. At first everything seemed fine. She gave him food, gifts, even a Game Boy. "You're the little brother I never had," she told him. But then came the new game. "This is just between us," she whispered. "No one else can play." The hyena grinned. Kwame didn't understand, but he felt something was wrong. The hands that once ruffled his hair started to linger. The voice that once told stories began whispering things that made his stomach twist. "Aye, Kwame, you'll learn to enjoy it with time." No, he wouldn't. He started hating her house. He dragged his feet, stayed late at school, anything to avoid going back. And then one day he found his courage. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it, Kwame?" she asked, barely looking up. "It's about Auntie Zali." "Kwame, how many times did I call your name?" she snapped. "We work day and night to give you a better life. Auntie Zalika is helping us. You should be grateful." Grateful? For what? For the nights he lay awake, feeling like something had been stolen from him. For the confusion, the shame, the invisible chains that tightened every time she called his name. "Go to your room and finish your homework, and don't bring this up again." The young lion tried to warn the pride, but the pride didn't listen. That night, he cried alone in his room. Nobody heard him. Nobody wanted to. But here's the thing. Hyenas may laugh, but they're not kings of the savannah. A lion that goes quiet today will roar tomorrow, and when he does, the whole jungle will listen. They say if you listen closely at night, you can hear the lonely wail of a hyena. That day is coming. When the river overflows, something is wrong. In the heart of the savannah, when a river overflows in the dry season, the elders don't just shrug it off. They know something unnatural is happening upstream. Kwame woke up that morning to find his own river had run over, soaking his sheets. His stomach twisted. He hadn't wet the bed since he was a toddler. He hadn't even had too much water the night before. But here he was, sitting in a damp mess, the sharp scent of urine clinging to his skin. Could it be because of Auntie Zalika's game? The thought made his chest tighten. He knew he couldn't tell his parents. His mother wasn't the type to coo over accidents. She was the kind to reach for a cane. So, like a gazelle hiding from a predator, Kwame did what he could. He flipped the mattress, changed his clothes, and prayed nobody would notice. But the river didn't stop overflowing. Day after day the same thing happened. His parents were too busy counting the coins from their shop to count the silent cries of their son. But Kwame felt it in his bones. Something was wrong. "I don't like your game." After another long school day, Kwame found himself back at Auntie Zalika's house. She greeted him with rice and juice, her smile wide as ever. But when she reached for him, ready to play her secret game, Kwame finally spoke. "Auntie, I don't like your game," he said, his voice small but firm. "It's making me wet my bed every night. I don't think I feel good." For the first time the hyena's grin slipped. She froze, eyes flickering like she was calculating something. Then, in an instant, the smile was back. "Ah, Kwame, don't worry," she said smoothly, inching closer. "It's normal for boys your age. You'll grow out of it." But Kwame wasn't comforted. How could he explain the dread that knotted in his stomach the second he stepped into her house? The way his heart pounded like war drums, the way he felt caged, even when he wasn't locked in? He wished, prayed, that his parents would just come home early. But every day was the same. And slowly, the weight of it all started pressing down on him. The lion cub begins to fade. Kwame, once a bright star in his classroom, started to dim. His mind wandered during lessons. His laughter, once loud and carefree, was now missing from the schoolyard. While his friends chased each other under the sun, he sat alone, his mind haunted by things a child should never have to think about. And then, Madame Nia noticed. Madame Nia wasn't like the other teachers. She didn't just teach, she watched. She could read her students like the elders read the sky before a storm. And right now, she saw dark clouds gathering over Kwame. So after class, she called him over. "Kwame, is something wrong? You've been looking lost these past few days." Kwame stood before her desk, his head low. The words clawed at his throat, desperate to escape. But when he tried to speak, they turned to stone. "No, Ma, everything is fine," he lied. Madame Nia didn't believe him, not one bit. But she let him go, her sharp eyes following his every move. That night Kwame walked home, his lips silently forming a prayer. "Please let my parents be home. Please, not Auntie Zalika's house again." But when he reached the door, it was the same story. Empty house, same trap, same game, something he couldn't ignore. But this time, something changed. As Auntie Zalika played her twisted game, Kwame's body betrayed him. His heart pounded, his hands clenched into fists. And then, he felt it. A strange, stiff feeling between his legs. His breath caught, his stomach twisted in horror. He didn't understand what was happening to his own body, but he knew one thing. This was it. This was the moment he couldn't ignore. The next day he didn't wait for Madame Nia to call him. He walked straight up to her desk, his head bowed, shame curling around his words. "Auntie," he whispered, "I have something to tell you." Madame Nia leaned in, her face serious, her eyes locked onto his. She was listening. And for the first time, Kwame felt like someone might finally hear him. When the lion cub roars, the jungle listens. Kwame's hands were sweaty. His heart pounded like war drums. He darted his eyes left and right, making sure no one was eavesdropping. Then, leaning in close to Madame Nia, he whispered words that had been caged inside him for too long. "It's Auntie Zalika, our neighbor at home. She does things to me and makes me do things I can't explain." Madame Nia froze. Her warm, playful face hardened into something else, something fierce, something protective. She listened. She let him speak. And when he finished, she did something no one else had done. "Kwame, you have done well," she said, her voice steady, filled with a promise. "You don't have to feel bad, my boy. Nobody deserves to go through what you have been through in the hands of Auntie Zalika. Don't worry. I will do everything in my power to help you." For the first time in weeks, Kwame felt lighter, like a heavy rock had been lifted from his chest. But as relief washed over him, so did fear. What would Auntie Zalika do when she found out? The gathering storm Madame Nia wasted no time. This wasn't the kind of thing you brushed aside. She called a meeting with the headmistress and the school board, and they all agreed. This had to be handled immediately. The next day, Mr. and Mrs. Okoro were summoned to the school. The second Mrs. Okoro stepped into the headmistress's office. Her face was filled with worry. "Did Kwame get into trouble?" she asked, her voice tight, her patience thin. "No, please have your seat," the headmistress said. "What we are about to discuss is far worse." And then she dropped the truth on them like thunder splitting the sky. "Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, Your son has revealed to us some very sad incidents involving your neighbor, Auntie Zalika. Kwame said that she touches him every day. Are you aware of this? Silence. Then, what? Mr. Okoro shot up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled over, his fists clenched, his chest heaving, Mrs. Okoro's face drained of colour. Madam Nia stepped in, breaking down everything just as Kwame had told her. There was no denying it now. For a long time nobody spoke. The room was thick with rage, guilt and shock. Mr. Okoro's breathing was heavy, his muscles tense with the urge to act. But after long discussions, after pleads from the school board, he finally nodded. I won't take matters into my own hands, he growled, but this woman will face justice. The hyena falls. That evening, for the first time in a long time, Mrs. Okoro personally came to pick Kwame up from school. As they walked home, she turned to him, her voice unsteady. Kwame, I am so sorry, she said. And this time she wasn't rushing, wasn't cutting him off. I was too caught up in work. I didn't listen. I didn't see. But we've taken care of everything now. You will be safe again, my son. A tear rolled down her cheek, and for once Kwame didn't feel alone. Then came the knock. A heavy, earth-shaking knock on Auntie Zalika's door. She opened it to find 3 police officers standing there, guns at their sides, eyes cold as steel. Miss Zalika, one of them said, his voice flat and emotionless, you are under arrest for child molestation. Zalika's face twisted in horror. You must be mistaken. You are in the wrong house, she stammered, stepping back. It is best you remain silent, or anything you say or do will be used against you in a court of law, the officer warned, as he snapped cold metal cuffs around her wrists. From his window, Kwame watched. His heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else, something like relief. As they dragged her into the police van, as the doors slammed shut, Kwame exhaled a breath he felt like he had been holding forever. The sun rises again. Things didn't magically fix themselves overnight. Kwame still flinched at shadows. The bedwetting didn't disappear right away. But something had changed. His parents started paying attention. They took turns picking him up from school, staying home with him, listening to him. At school, Madam Nia kept a close eye on him. She reminded him, and every other student, that if they were ever in trouble, if they ever needed help, they should speak up. And slowly, the lion cub who had once been silent began to find his roar again. Hyenas laugh, but when the lion rises, the jungle bows. And Kwame? He was rising.